My name is Marcus Williams, 68 years old and a widower for the past 5 years since I lost my Barbara. After 42 years of marriage, the silence in our home became deafening until my son Thomas moved back in 3 years ago following his divorce. I thought having family around again would ease my loneliness. Instead, I found myself facing the most hurtful words a parent could hear from their child. "Dad, I think it's time you moved out." His words knocked the wind out of me, but what he never expected was my response. If you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family, give this video a like and subscribe to join me as I share how I reclaimed my dignity after my own son tried to push me out of my home. Barbara and I were high school sweethearts in a small town outside of Pittsburgh. I still remember the first time I saw her in sophomore English class, her chestnut hair falling over her shoulders as she bent over her notebook. I asked her to the spring dance that year, and from then on, we were inseparable. We married right after graduation in 1975, against her parents' wishes who thought we were too young. They wanted her to go to college, but Barbara had her mind set on starting a family with me. We started out in a tiny one-bedroom apartment while I worked 2 jobs, days at the steel mill and nights stocking shelves at the local grocery. Barbara worked as a receptionist at the dentist's office until she got pregnant with Thomas. Money was always tight in those early years. We saved every penny, clipping coupons and buying second-hand, dreaming of owning our own home someday. It took us 7 years of scrimping and saving before we could afford the down payment on our modest 3-bedroom house on Maple Street. It wasn't much to look at initially. Peeling wallpaper in the kitchen, carpets that had seen better days, and a backyard that was more dirt than grass. But it was ours, and we poured our hearts into making it a home. Weekends were spent painting walls, laying new flooring, and planting a garden. Barbara had a knack for finding beautiful things at garage sales, slowly filling our home with character and warmth. Thomas arrived a year after we bought the house. He was our only child, not by choice, but because complications during his birth meant Barbara couldn't have more children. Perhaps that's why we both doted on him so much. Thomas was a bright, energetic boy with his mother's warm brown eyes and my stubborn chin. He was the center of our universe, and looking back now, maybe we spoiled him more than we should have. Barbara was always the disciplinarian between us. I tended to give in to Thomas's pleas for candy before dinner, or for staying up past his bedtime. "Marcus, you're not doing him any favors by always saying yes," Barbara would tell me. She was right, of course. She usually was. Our home was filled with the typical chaos of family life. Thomas's sporting equipment scattered across the living room, science projects taking over the kitchen table, the constant parade of friends tracking mud through the house. Barbara somehow managed to keep it all in order while working part-time as a school secretary. I moved up to foreman at the mill, and while we were never wealthy, we were comfortable. Thomas went to the local community college, then transferred to state to finish his business degree. He met Stephanie during his junior year, and they married a year after graduation. Barbara transformed the house for their wedding reception, stringing lights in the backyard and filling every corner with flowers. It was one of the happiest days of our lives, seeing our son start his own family. Barbara's cancer diagnosis came without warning 5 years ago. One day she was gardening and complaining about back pain, and 6 months later she was gone. The aggressive pancreatic cancer took her before either of us had fully processed what was happening. The day of her funeral remains a blur in my memory. A procession of sympathetic faces and casseroles I couldn't bring myself to eat. The house felt cavernous without her. I'd wake up reaching for her in the night, only to touch cold sheets. Her garden withered that first summer, as I couldn't bring myself to tend to it. I kept expecting to hear her humming in the kitchen or calling me for dinner. 42 years together, and suddenly I was alone, rattling around in a house full of memories but empty of life. Thomas and Stephanie visited regularly at first. They'd bring dinner and check on me, make sure I was taking my blood pressure medication and keeping doctor appointments. Their marriage had been showing signs of strain even before Barbara's illness, and about 2 years after her passing, Thomas called to tell me they were divorcing. Stephanie had met someone else, he said. Someone younger, more exciting. I heard the heartbreak in his voice and recognized it all too well. 3 months after that call, Thomas showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and a box of office supplies. "Dad," he said, his eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep. I couldn't tell which. "Can I stay here just for a few months? Just until I get back on my feet?" At 42, my son was starting over, just as I was trying to figure out how to live the remainder of my life without Barbara. "Of course you can stay," I told him, feeling a flutter of something like relief in my chest. Maybe having Thomas around would fill some of the silence. Maybe we could help each other heal. "This is your home too. Stay as long as you need." Those first few months with Thomas back home were pleasant. He seemed grateful for the support, often thanking me for dinner or bringing home groceries. He'd join me for the evening news, asking about my day at the retirement center where I volunteered. Having someone to talk to after years of loneliness was like rain after a drought. I found myself looking forward to evenings again. Thomas took over Barbara's office space for his remote work, setting up his computers and filing cabinets. I was happy to see the room being used again instead of sitting as a shrine to my late wife. He helped around the house too, mowing the lawn, fixing the leaky bathroom faucet, things that had fallen into disrepair as my arthritis worsened and my motivation waned. "It's nice having you around, son," I told him one evening as we sat on the porch watching the summer sunset, something Barbara and I used to do every night in warm weather. "Your mother would be happy to see us taking care of each other." "I'm glad to be here, Dad," he said, though I noticed his eyes were on his phone more than the sunset. "It's good to save on rent while I rebuild my savings after the divorce." I should have noticed that first red flag, his focus on the financial benefit rather than our relationship, but I was so grateful for the company that I overlooked it. The changes happened so gradually I barely noticed at first. Thomas's belongings began migrating from his childhood bedroom to the common areas, his coat over the living room chair instead of the hall closet. His mail spread across the kitchen counter, his gym shoes kicked off in the middle of the entryway. "Could you pick up after yourself a bit more?" I asked one morning, after tripping over a dumbbell he'd left in the hallway. "My hip isn't what it used to be." "Sorry, Dad," he said with a quick smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just running late for a meeting." He didn't pick up the dumbbell, and I eventually did it myself. Then came the friends. At first it was just 1 or 2 colleagues coming over to work on projects. Then it became weekend gatherings that stretched late into the night. Music thumping through the walls as I tried to sleep, empty beer bottles crowding the recycling bin. I didn't mind Thomas having a social life. In fact, I was glad to see him moving past his divorce. But the way they took over the entire house, without so much as asking if I minded, that stung. "Thomas, next time you're planning to have people over, could you let me know in advance?" I asked, after a particularly rowdy Saturday night. He looked surprised. "Dad, I'm 42 years old. I shouldn't have to ask permission to have friends at my home." My home. The words echoed in my head as I watched him walk away. When had he started thinking of my house? The house Barbara and I had saved for, had raised him in, as his. By the 6-month mark, I found myself retreating more and more to my bedroom as Thomas expanded his territory. He rearranged the living room furniture without asking, claiming the old setup wasn't conducive to the gaming system he'd bought. The television that had been set to my preferred volume was now constantly blaring sports or action movies at levels that made my ears ring. "Dad, do you have to get up so early?" He complained one morning when he found me making coffee at 6:30, my normal wake-up time for the past 40 years. "Some of us work late and need to sleep in." "This is when I've always gotten up," I replied, but found myself tiptoeing around my own kitchen anyway, not wanting to cause friction. With each passing month, I made more accommodations. I stopped watching my favorite detective shows in the evening because Thomas said they were depressing. I adjusted my meal times around his schedule. I learned to live with the dishes piling up in the sink because his standards of cleanliness were far different from mine or his mother's. When Thomas passed the 1-year mark of living with me, I gently broached the subject of his future plans. "So, have you been looking at apartments?" I asked casually over Sunday breakfast. "The housing market in the area seems to be picking up." Thomas stirred his coffee slowly. Actually, Dad, I've been thinking. It makes more sense for me to stay here. Why pay rent when this house is too big for just you anyway? I'm helping with utilities and maintenance. It's a win-win. I felt a twinge of unease but pushed it aside. I suppose that makes sense for now, I said carefully. But eventually, you'll want your own place again. He shrugged. We'll see. My financial advisor says I should focus on rebuilding my retirement fund after the divorce settlement. Stephanie took half of everything. Whenever I brought up the subject after that, Thomas had a ready excuse. The market was too expensive. He was waiting for a promotion. He was helping me out by being there. And I let myself believe it because part of me still dreaded returning to my solitary existence. Around the 18-month mark, Thomas got the promotion he'd been waiting for. His salary nearly doubled, according to the celebratory speech he gave at the dinner I cooked for him. Now, I thought, he'll start looking for his own place. But instead of house-hunting websites, his computer screen showed new car models and vacation packages. Thinking of taking a trip? I asked when I spotted him looking at resorts in Cabo. I deserve it after all the hard work, he said. Actually, I was thinking you could come too, Dad. We could use some father-son time. That gesture of inclusion warmed my heart, momentarily overshadowing my concerns about his permanent residence in my home. He did care about our relationship after all. Maybe I was being selfish, wanting my space back. The Cabo trip never materialized, but Thomas did buy himself a new luxury SUV that barely fit in the garage alongside my aging sedan. We might need to rearrange some things in here, he said, eyeing my workbench and Barbara's gardening supplies that I'd preserved in the corner. I can't risk getting door dings on the BMW. By the 2-year mark, I hardly recognized my own home. Thomas had taken over completely, and I had let him. As Thomas approached his 3rd year living in my house, the dynamic between us had completely shifted. No longer was he a grateful son, staying temporarily with his widowed father. He had become the de facto owner of the property, with me as the increasingly unwelcome houseguest. The common areas underwent transformations without any consultation. The comfortable, slightly worn furniture that Barbara and I had chosen together disappeared piece by piece, replaced with sleek, modern items that looked good but hurt my back. The warm yellow walls that Barbara had loved for their cheerfulness were repainted in cold grays and whites. The place needed updating, Dad, Thomas said when I expressed surprise at coming home from my volunteer shift to find painters in the living room. The old color scheme was depressing and outdated. I swallowed my objection. Barbara had picked those colors. They were the backdrop to 40 years of family photos, of Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations. But I didn't want to sound like I was living in the past. My belongings began migrating to increasingly smaller spaces. I came home one day to find my collection of vinyl records that had been in the living room bookshelf now boxed up in the garage. I needed the shelf space for my home office expansion, Thomas explained when I asked. Besides, when was the last time you actually played those old things? The previous week, actually. I'd been listening to Frank Sinatra while looking through photo albums, but I didn't mention that. Thomas's takeover extended to the kitchen as well. The cabinets were rearranged to accommodate his protein powders and supplements. The refrigerator was filled with meal prep containers and expensive craft beers, leaving little room for my simple groceries. He'd talk about our food budget, but somehow that translated to more of his preferences and fewer of mine. The basement became his home gym, with equipment that I was welcome to use but that exacerbated my arthritis. The guest bedroom transformed into his creative space for a podcast he started with friends, complete with sound-dampening panels on the walls and strict rules about when I could make noise in adjacent rooms. Around the 30-month mark, Thomas began bringing his new girlfriend Allison around regularly. She was attractive in an aggressive way, always perfectly made up, designer clothes, professionally highlighted hair. She worked in real estate development and had opinions about everything, especially my house. This kitchen is so inefficient. I overheard her telling Thomas one evening when they thought I was watching television. If you knocked down this wall and opened up the floor plan, the whole space would feel more modern. I know, Thomas replied. The layout is from the Stone Age, But renovations like that are expensive. It would increase the property value significantly, though, she countered. Something to think about. They spoke about my home as if I weren't there, as if I had no say in structural changes to the house I had owned for 35 years. It was the first time I felt a flash of real anger, rather than just discomfort. Allison began staying overnight with increasing frequency. I'd come downstairs to find her in the kitchen, wearing Thomas's shirt, helping herself to coffee as if she lived there. She was never outright disrespectful to me, but there was a condescension in her tone when she spoke to me, as if I were a child or someone with diminished capacity. "Did you take your pills today, Marcus?" she'd ask. "Or do you need help with that smartphone? The technology can be confusing for your generation." I began to feel like an intruder in my own kitchen, timing my meals around when I knew they wouldn't be there. I started eating more dinners alone in my bedroom, a sandwich or microwave meal balanced on a TV tray while watching old westerns. The one form of entertainment Thomas hadn't commandeered. One night I overheard them talking in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. "Your dad really lives like someone from another era," Allison said. "Does he realize it's not 1980 anymore?" Thomas laughed. "I know. The way he shuffles around in those slippers, watching those ancient TV shows. Sometimes I wonder if he's even trying to enjoy life anymore. It must be hard having him here," she said. "Like having a permanent house guest that you can't ask to leave." "Tell me about it," Thomas replied. "He's my dad and I love him, but this house would be perfect for us without all his outdated stuff cluttering it up." I lay in bed that night, tears stinging my eyes. My son, my only child who I had welcomed with open arms when he needed help, thought of me as a burden, an inconvenience, a barrier to his enjoyment of a house that he had contributed nothing to acquiring or maintaining for most of its history. 2 weeks after overhearing that conversation, Thomas announced he was hosting a birthday party for himself, his 42nd. He didn't ask if I minded having 20 people in the house. He informed me it was happening. He didn't invite my friends or include me in the planning. When I offered to help prepare food, he said Allison had ordered catering because Dad's cooking isn't really the vibe we're going for. The night of the party, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Thomas's friends filled every room, drinking expensive whiskey from glasses that had been wedding presents to Barbara and me. Music I didn't recognize pulsed through speakers that had been installed without my knowledge. No one spoke to me except to ask me to move from whatever spot I was occupying. By 9 o'clock, I retreated to my bedroom, the only space that still felt marginally mine. The final straw came a week later. I was looking for a particular serving platter to use for the retirement center's potluck. It had been Barbara's mother's, a beautiful hand-painted ceramic piece that we only used for special occasions. I couldn't find it in any of the kitchen cabinets and went searching in the basement storage. There, I found several boxes labeled Goodwill. Curious, I opened the top one and felt my heart drop. Inside was Barbara's special china set, the one her grandmother had passed down to her, the one we'd used for every Christmas dinner of our married life. Next to it was the serving platter I'd been searching for, along with photo frames, knickknacks, and other items that had been part of our home for decades. With shaking hands, I opened the other boxes. More of our things, my things, and Barbara's things, all packed away like worthless junk. Items that held memories, that connected me to my late wife and our life together. All deemed dispensable without so much as a conversation. I was still sitting there, surrounded by the boxes, when Thomas came home from work. The look on his face when he saw me wasn't guilt, it was annoyance. "Dad, what are you doing going through those boxes?" "I had them organized. Organized for goodwill," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "This is your mother's china, her grandmother's china." Thomas shrugged. "It's just taking up space in the cabinets. No one uses that formal stuff anymore. Allison and I were making room for the new dinnerware set we ordered." "You had no right," I said, my voice rising. "These things are not yours to give away. This house is not yours to redecorate. This is my home, Thomas, mine, and your mother's." "Mom's been gone for 5 years," he snapped. "And this place is a museum to the past. It's time to move forward. By erasing her? By erasing me? I was shouting now, something I rarely did. I welcomed you into my home when you needed help. I didn't ask for rent. I made space for you. And this is how you repay that kindness? By gradually pushing me out? You're being dramatic, Dad, Thomas said. But he couldn't meet my eyes. I'm just trying to update things around here. I carefully repacked the china, making sure each piece was properly wrapped. These boxes are not going to Goodwill. And from now on you do not touch anything else in this house without asking me first. Is that clear? Thomas stormed off without answering, slamming his bedroom door like the teenager he apparently still was emotionally. I spent that night moving the boxes to my bedroom closet, the only place that felt safe from his invasion. As I handled each piece of Barbara's china, each photo frame and keepsake, I felt a resolve hardening within me. Something would have to change. The morning after the china incident, I came downstairs to find Thomas already at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone while drinking coffee. The tension from our argument hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. I quietly made myself toast and sat across from him, waiting to see if he would acknowledge what had happened. After several minutes of silence, he finally set his phone down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't apologetic, as I had hoped. Instead, there was a determined set to his jaw that reminded me painfully of his mother when she'd made up her mind about something. "Dad," he began, his voice measured and calm in a way that immediately put me on edge. "We need to talk about the future." "I agree," I said, relieved that he seemed ready to discuss boundaries. "Last night was—" "I think it's time you moved out," he interrupted, the words hitting me like a physical blow. "This house is too big for you to manage alone." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "Excuse me? I've been thinking about this for a while," Thomas continued, as if discussing something as mundane as changing internet providers. "This 3-bedroom house is excessive for a single man your age. The stairs are becoming difficult for you. The yard work is too much. You'd be much happier in a retirement community where everything is on one level and there are people your own age." My toast lay forgotten on the plate as I struggled to process what my son was saying. "Thomas, this is my house. I'm not moving anywhere." "Dad, be reasonable," he said with that same condescending tone Allison often used with me. "You're just rattling around in this big place by yourself. The Willows has beautiful condos for active seniors. They have social activities, a gym, everything you need." "Everything except my home," I said, finding my voice. "Everything except the house your mother and I worked for decades to buy and maintain. Everything except my memories and my dignity." Thomas sighed, as if I were being difficult on purpose. "Allison and I have been talking." "Of course you have," I interrupted. He frowned at me. "We're thinking about starting a family soon. This house has good schools nearby. It has a yard for kids to play in. It makes sense for us to live here rather than buying something new when there's a perfectly good family home available." "Available?" I repeated incredulously. "This house isn't available. It's my home." "Dad, I'm trying to be practical here," Thomas said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You're almost 70. You should be downsizing, not hanging onto a house that's full of maintenance issues and stairs that will become dangerous for you soon. So your solution is to push me out of my own home so you and Allison can move in?" I clarified, still struggling to believe this conversation was actually happening. "I wouldn't phrase it like that," he said, looking uncomfortable for the first time. "I'm thinking about what's best for everyone. You'd be happier in a place with less upkeep. I'd be able to stay in the family home. It's win-win." I stood up, my breakfast untouched. "Let me be perfectly clear, Thomas. I have no intention of moving out of my house. Not today, not next year, not until I decide it's time. This house is in my name. I pay the mortgage and the property taxes. You are here as my guest, not the other way around." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "After everything I've done around here, the repairs, the updates, the improvements to the property value, I've invested in this place, Dad. I've made it livable again after you let it fall apart when Mom died." His words cut deep because there was a kernel of truth to them. I had neglected things after Barbara passed. The garden had become overgrown. The gutters had needed cleaning. The garage had become cluttered. But the house had never stopped being my home, my sanctuary. "I appreciate the help you've provided," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "But that doesn't give you ownership. That doesn't give you the right to decide I should leave." "You're being selfish," Thomas said, standing up as well. "Holding on to this big house when Allison and I could use it for our family. What would Mom think about you putting your sentimentality above your son's future?" The mention of Barbara in this context was the final straw. "Don't you dare use your mother to manipulate me," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "She would be appalled at how entitled you've become. She and I scrimped and saved for years to afford this house while you were still in diapers. You have no right to claim it now." "Fine," Thomas said coldly. "Keep living in the past, but don't expect me to stay and watch you refuse to move forward with your life." He grabbed his car keys and briefcase. "I'm late for work. We'll talk about this when I get home." After he stormed out, I sat heavily in the kitchen chair, trembling from the confrontation. The house felt suddenly airless, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out by Thomas's unthinkable demand. Move out of my own home? The home where Barbara and I had raised him? The home where every corner held a memory of our life together? I walked slowly through the rooms, seeing with fresh eyes how much had already changed under Thomas's influence. The wall color, the furniture, the artwork. Even the air freshener scent was different, some expensive sandalwood blend instead of the clean linen fragrance Barbara had always preferred. In our bedroom, my bedroom now, I sank down on the edge of the bed and picked up the framed photo of Barbara that still sat on my nightstand. It was from our 35th anniversary, her smile radiant as we posed in front of the Grand Canyon. "What would you do, Barb?" I whispered to her image. "How did we raise a son who thinks he's entitled to push his father out of his own home?" I spent the rest of the day in a fog of disbelief and hurt, alternating between anger at Thomas's audacity and a deep, gnawing sorrow that our relationship had deteriorated to this point. By evening, I had retreated to my bedroom, unable to face another confrontation when he returned from work. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, replaying Thomas's words and my responses, thinking of all the things I should have said. Around 3 a.m, I got up and pulled out the fireproof box from under the bed where I kept important documents. The deed to the house was there, solely in my name. The mortgage statements showing my payments for 35 years. The homeowner's insurance policy. The property tax receipts. These papers represented decades of my life, of Barbara's and my life together. Our commitment to providing a stable home for our family. The sacrifices we'd made to keep a roof over our heads and Thomas's. And now, that same son wanted to take it all away because it was convenient for him and his girlfriend. As dawn broke, I came to a decision. I would not be pushed out of my own home. But neither could I continue living with a son who had so little respect for me. Something would have to change. And if Thomas wouldn't, then I would have to take matters into my own hands. The next morning, I waited until Thomas left for work before emerging from my bedroom. I felt different. A strange calm had replaced the shock and hurt of the previous day. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, making 2 columns, options and consequences. Under options, I wrote, 1. Confront Thomas again. 2. Ask him to move out. 3. Seek family counseling. 4. Move out as he suggested. 5. Other. As I stared at option 5, an idea began to form. One that made my heart race with both anxiety and a surprising sense of liberation. What if I sold the house entirely? The market was strong in our area. The house was fully paid off. I could use the money to find a place that was truly mine again, without the painful reminders of how my relationship with my son had deteriorated. Before I could talk myself out of it, I called my old friend Frank Henderson. He had retired from his law practice 5 years ago but still kept his hand in real estate matters. If anyone could help me understand my options, it was Frank. "Marcus, it's been too long," Frank said when he picked up. "How are you holding up?" "Not great, Frank," I admitted. I need some legal advice. Could we meet today? 2 hours later, I was sitting in Frank's home office, explaining the situation with Thomas. Frank listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Let me get this straight," he said when I finished. "Your adult son, who you welcomed into your home 3 years ago as a temporary arrangement, now thinks he has the right to ask you to move out of your own house? That's about the size of it," I confirmed. Frank shook his head. "Well, legally speaking, you're on solid ground. The house is solely in your name. Thomas has no ownership claim whatsoever, regardless of any repairs or improvements he's made. As the homeowner, you have every right to ask him to leave." "What if I wanted to sell?" I asked, voicing the idea that had been growing in my mind. Frank raised his eyebrows. "You'd be well within your rights to do so. The proceeds would be entirely yours. You don't need Thomas's permission or input." "What's the fastest I could make that happen?" I asked. "A traditional sale usually takes at least 30 to 60 days from listing to closing," Frank explained. "But there are companies that specialize in quick cash purchases. They typically offer below market value, but they can close in as little as a week in some cases." On the drive home, I passed a billboard advertising fast cash for homes with a local company called Swift Home Buyers. On impulse, I pulled over and called the number. The representative was eager to set up an appointment for that same afternoon. "We can make you an all-cash offer on the spot," she promised. "No repairs needed, no staging, no open houses. We buy as is." By 3 o'clock that afternoon, a friendly but shrewd young man named Jason was walking through my house, making notes on a tablet. He asked about the age of the roof, the HVAC system, and other major components. "Based on comparable sales in your neighborhood and the condition of your property, we can offer $360,000, all cash, with closing in as little as 15 days, Jason said after completing his walkthrough. I knew the offer was below market value. Similar homes in our neighborhood had been selling for around $400,000. But the speed and certainty were worth the discount to me. "Can we make it exactly 15 days from today?" I asked. "Absolutely," Jason said, pulling up a calendar on his tablet. "That would put us at closing on the 24th. Perfect." Thomas was scheduled to attend a 3-day business conference in Chicago from the 21st to the 23rd. He would return to a done deal. "I'll need to find a new place before closing," I told Jason. "We can include a rent-back clause if you need more time," he offered, but I shook my head. "No, I'll have arrangements made by then." After Jason left, I spent the evening online, searching for rentals in the area. I had always loved the idea of living near water, and there was a small lake about 20 minutes away with a luxury condo complex for residents 55 and older. Barbara and I had once talked about retiring to a place like that, but she had been too attached to our family home to consider it seriously. The next day, I drove to the lake and toured a 2-bedroom condo that overlooked the water. It was modern but warm, with an open floor plan and a balcony where I could imagine sitting with morning coffee. The complex had a clubhouse, a fitness center, and walking trails around the lake. Best of all, it was available for immediate move-in with a 1-year lease. "I'll take it," I told the leasing agent. "I can sign today and give you first and last month's rent." As I signed the paperwork, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. This would be a fresh start, a place that was mine alone, without the ghost of Thomas's betrayal haunting every room. Over the next few days, I moved with quiet determination. I met with Swift Home Buyers again and signed the purchase agreement, locking in the closing date for the 24th. I opened a new bank account at a different bank than the one Thomas and I shared. I began discreetly packing Barbara's keepsakes and my most treasured belongings, storing them in the trunk of my car during the day, and bringing them back in to pack more when Thomas was at work. Thomas seemed to think our disagreement had been resolved by his simply declaring what would happen. He made no further mention of me moving out, but I noticed him taking measurements in the spare bedroom and overheard him on the phone with Allison, discussing paint colors for when we redo the master suite. The duplicity was exhausting, but also oddly energizing. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my life instead of passively allowing Thomas to make decisions for me. I arranged for movers to come on the 23rd, while Thomas would be in Chicago. I scheduled utilities to be turned on at the condo and disconnected at the house effective the closing date. As the day of Thomas's business trip approached, I felt increasingly nervous but also resolute. The morning he was to leave, he breezed through the kitchen with his suitcase, barely acknowledging me. "I'll be back Thursday evening," he said, checking his phone. "Allison might stop by to pick up some files from my office while I'm gone." I told her where the spare key is. Of course he had given Allison a key without asking me. "Of course. Have a safe trip," I said mildly, not letting on that by the time he returned, everything would have changed. After his car pulled out of the driveway, I allowed myself a moment of doubt. Was I doing the right thing? Would this irreparably damage our relationship? But then, I remembered his words. "I think it's time you moved out." And my resolve hardened again. Thomas had forced this situation, not me. I was simply taking back control of my own life. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The movers came and loaded my carefully packed boxes, along with the furniture from my bedroom and a few select pieces from the common areas that held special meaning. I left Thomas's belongings untouched, along with the furniture he had purchased. On the morning of the 24th, I met Jason from Swift Home Buyers at the closing attorney's office. As I signed the papers transferring ownership of my family home of 35 years, I felt a complex mix of emotions: sadness, loss, but also a strange sense of liberation. "Congratulations," the attorney said, handing me a cashier's check for the proceeds after paying off the small remaining mortgage. "The house is officially sold." I drove to my new condo and stood on the balcony overlooking the lake, watching sunlight glitter on the water. For the first time in 3 years, I was in a space that was fully mine, where no one could tell me to leave or rearrange my belongings or question my right to be there. The relief was overwhelming. That evening, I knew Thomas would be returning from his conference. I had left him a letter on the kitchen counter explaining what I had done and why, along with a key to the condo should he wish to talk. I included the contact information for the new owners, who had given Thomas 30 days to vacate the property, far more generous than the time to move out he had offered me. As I sat on my new couch, looking out at the sunset over the lake, my phone began to ring. It was Thomas. I took a deep breath and answered, ready to face whatever came next. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Thomas's voice was shrill with panic. "I just got home and there are people in our house claiming they own it." "They do own it," I replied calmly. "The closing was this morning." There was a moment of stunned silence before Thomas exploded. "You sold our house? Without telling me? Without even discussing it?" "Yes," I said simply. "Just like you decided I should move out without discussing it with me. That's completely different. I was thinking about what was best for you." "No, Thomas. You were thinking about what was best for you and Allison. The house is sold. The new owners have generously given you 30 days to find a new place and move your things." I heard him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "I can't believe you would do this. Where are you? Where's all your stuff?" "I've found a new place. My belongings are here with me." "This is insane, Dad. You can't just sell the family home without consulting me. I grew up there. Mom's memories are there." The mention of Barbara sent a flash of anger through me. "The memories I share with your mother aren't in the walls, Thomas. They're in my heart, and in the mementos I've carefully preserved, the ones you were going to donate to Goodwill." "That was just some old china," he protested weakly. "It was more than that, and you know it," I said. "It was about respect. Respect for me, for your mother's memory, for our home. You showed none of that when you decided it was time for me to leave my own house." "I didn't mean it like that," Thomas said, his tone shifting from anger to pleading. "I was just thinking practically. Where am I supposed to go on such short notice? 30 days isn't enough time to find a decent place." The irony of his complaint wasn't lost on me. "You managed to survive for 40 years before moving back in with me. I'm sure you'll figure it out." "I can't believe you're being so cold about this," he said. "This isn't like you, Dad." "You're right," I agreed. "The old me would have acquiesced to your demands. The old me would have put your wants above my needs. But that version of me led to you believing you had the right to push me out of my own home. I couldn't let that stand." "So what now?" Thomas asked, sounding defeated. "You've made your point. You've turned my life upside down. Are you happy?" "This isn't about happiness, son," I said quietly. "It's about boundaries and respect. Something I should have established long ago." "Where are you living?" he demanded. "I want to come talk about this face to face." I hesitated, torn between wanting to maintain my newfound independence and hoping for reconciliation. "I've rented a condo at Lakeview Estates," I finally said. I left the address in the letter on the kitchen counter. "You're welcome to come by tomorrow, if you want to talk calmly." "Fine," he said curtly and hung up. The next day, I waited anxiously for Thomas to appear. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Thomas stood there with Allison beside him, both looking angry and defensive. "You might as well both come in," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. Thomas walked into my new living room, looking around critically. "So this is where you've run off to? Some random apartment?" "It's a condo," I corrected him. "And it's not random. I chose it carefully." Allison spoke up for the first time. "Marcus, do you realize what you've done? Thomas and I were planning our future around that house. We had contractors scheduled to give estimates on renovations next week. Without consulting me, the actual homeowner," I pointed out. "That seems to be a pattern with you two." "Dad," Thomas said, making a visible effort to control his temper. "You have to undo this. Call the buyers and tell them there's been a mistake." I shook my head. "The sale is final. The deed has been transferred. It's done." "Then where am I supposed to live?" he demanded. "I have 30 days to find a place and move all my stuff. Do you know how impossible the rental market is right now?" "You could stay here temporarily," I offered, surprising myself. "The second bedroom is available, but there would have to be clear boundaries and a defined end date." Thomas looked at me like I'd suggested he live in a cardboard box. "Here? This tiny place? Where would I put all my things?" "Storage unit," I suggested. "That's what most people do when downsizing." Allison tugged at Thomas's arm. "We are not staying here," she said firmly. "We'll figure something else out." She turned to me with cold eyes. "I hope you're satisfied with destroying your relationship with your son over a house." "I didn't destroy anything," I replied evenly. "I simply refused to be pushed out of my own home." The destruction began when Thomas decided his convenience was more important than my dignity. They left shortly after, Thomas slamming the door behind them. In the following weeks, I heard from Thomas only through terse text messages asking about various items in the house, what he could take, what belonged to me, whether I wanted anything else that I'd left behind. The new owners of my old house were a young couple expecting their first child. When I met them at closing, I felt a sense of rightness about passing the home to another family just starting out, as Barbara and I had been all those years ago. They were eager and appreciative, promising to tend the garden that Barbara had loved. As for Thomas, he moved in with Allison at her downtown apartment, a temporary arrangement, according to the few updates I received. He refused my invitations for dinner or coffee, returning my calls only sporadically. The few times we did speak, his voice was cold and formal, as if talking to a distant acquaintance rather than his father. The hardest part was the holidays. Thanksgiving came and went without a word from Thomas. As Christmas approached, I decorated my new condo with a small tree and the ornaments Barbara and I had collected over the years. I attended the Lakeview Estates community dinner and met several neighbors who became casual friends. But the absence of family, of my only child, left an ache that no new friendship could fill. I wrote Thomas a Christmas card, including a check as I'd done every year, expressing my hope that we could rebuild our relationship in the coming year. The check was cashed, but no acknowledgement or return card ever came. Winter melted into spring, and I gradually settled into my new life. The Lakeview provided constant change. Misty mornings, Windswept afternoons, spectacular sunsets. I joined the community garden club and planted tomatoes in a small plot, channeling Barbara's green thumb as best I could. I volunteered at the local library, reading to children during story hour. Slowly, I built a routine that brought me satisfaction, if not the complete happiness I'd known when Barbara was alive. My new home became truly mine, arranged exactly as I liked. Peaceful in a way my old house hadn't been for years. 4 months after the sale, I ran into Allison at the grocery store. I nearly turned around when I spotted her, but she had already seen me. To my surprise, she approached with a neutral expression rather than the hostility I expected. "Marcus," she nodded. "How are you?" "I'm well," I replied cautiously. "And you? How is Thomas?" She sighed, some of her polished facade cracking. "He's struggling, to be honest. We found an apartment, but he hates it. Says it feels temporary, not like a home." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I took no joy in my son's unhappiness. "He's still very angry with you," she continued, examining an apple with unnecessary focus. "But I've been thinking about what happened from your perspective. I'm not sure I would have done anything differently in your position." Her admission startled me. "Thank you for saying that." "Don't thank me," she said quickly. "I still think you could have handled it differently, but I understand why you felt backed into a corner." She placed the apple in her basket. "I should go. Take care, Marcus." It was a small interaction, but it gave me hope that perhaps, with time, reconciliation might be possible. 6 months to the day after I sold the house, my phone rang with Thomas's number. I answered immediately, heart pounding. "Dad." His voice sounded different, subdued, possibly even contrite. "Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" The restaurant Thomas chose for our lunch was a neutral territory, not one of his trendy downtown spots, but not one of my old favorites either. A new bistro halfway between my condo and his apartment. I arrived early, selecting a quiet corner table where we could talk without being overheard. When Thomas walked in, I was struck by the changes in him. He had lost weight, and there was a weariness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He slid into the chair across from me with a nod of greeting. "You look well, Dad," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Thank you. How have you been, son?" I asked, genuinely wanting to know. He shrugged, studying the menu intently. "Adjusting. The apartment Allison and I found is okay. Small but functional." "I'm glad you found something," I said carefully. "The housing market can be challenging." An uncomfortable silence settled between us as we ordered and waited for our food. Finally, Thomas set down his water glass and met my eyes directly for the first time. "I'm still angry about what you did," he said bluntly. "Selling the house without warning me was extreme." I nodded, accepting his feelings without defensiveness. "I understand why you see it that way. From my perspective, it was the only path forward after you made it clear you wanted me to leave." "I didn't mean it like that," Thomas protested, but with less conviction than before. "I was thinking about practicality. The house was too big for you alone." "That wasn't your decision to make," I said gently. "The house was my home, paid for with decades of work by your mother and me." Thomas stared down at his plate. "I know," he admitted quietly. "I know that logically. But it still feels like you chose a building over me." "I didn't choose a building over you, Thomas. I chose my dignity and independence. There's a difference." Our food arrived, giving us both a moment to collect our thoughts. As we ate, I noticed Thomas glancing around the restaurant, seemingly gathering courage for whatever he wanted to say next. "Allison and I broke up," he finally announced, setting down his fork. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, surprised. "What happened?" "Living together in a small apartment happened," he said with a humorless laugh. "Turns out we had very different ideas about daily life when we weren't planning renovations to someone else's house." I bit back the urge to say that didn't surprise me. Instead, I asked, "Are you okay?" "Not really," Thomas admitted, "but it's for the best. I've been doing some thinking these past months, Dad, about how I treated you, about the entitlement I showed. I'm not proud of who I became." His unexpected self-awareness caught me off guard. "We all lose our way sometimes," I offered. Thomas shook his head. "This was more than losing my way. After my divorce, I was so focused on rebuilding my life that I didn't care whose feelings I trampled in the process, including yours." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm truly sorry for how I treated you in your own home." The apology I had wanted but never expected to hear brought a lump to my throat. "Thank you for saying that." "I'm not just saying it," Thomas insisted. "I mean it. Losing both the house and Allison forced me to confront some hard truths about myself. I've been talking to a therapist. She's helped me see how I was reenacting patterns from my failed marriage, trying to control my environment because I felt so out of control in my personal life. That takes courage to recognize," I said, genuinely impressed by his self-reflection. "I found my own place last week," he continued. "A small house, nothing fancy, but it's mine. Well, the bank's and mine." He smiled faintly. "I understand now what you meant about the pride of having your own home, something you've worked for." "I'd love to see it sometime," I said, hope rising cautiously within me. "I'd like that," Thomas replied. "It needs work, real work, not the cosmetic updates I was so focused on with your house. The roof leaks in one corner, the kitchen's a disaster. But I'm learning how to do repairs myself instead of hiring everything out." "I could help with that," I offered. "I'm not as spry as I used to be, but I still know my way around basic home repairs." Thomas's eyes brightened. "I'd appreciate that, actually." We finished our meal talking about more neutral topics. His work, my new activities at Lakeview Estates, a movie we'd both seen. As we waited for the check, Thomas cleared his throat nervously. "Dad, I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like another chance. To rebuild our relationship, I mean. Not living together again," he added hastily. "But to be father and son, to do better this time." The simple sincerity in his voice moved me deeply. "I'd like that too, Thomas. Very much." We parted with an awkward but heartfelt hug in the parking lot, promising to meet again the following weekend to work on his new house. Over the next several months, our relationship slowly mended. Each Saturday, I would drive to Thomas's small bungalow, and we would tackle a different repair project together. As we replaced rotted deck boards and caulked windows, we also rebuilt the trust between us, one conversation at a time. I learned about the financial struggles Thomas had hidden during his time in my house, how the divorce had left him with more debt than he had admitted, how his spending on furniture and renovations had been an attempt to prove to himself that he was still successful, despite his personal failures. In turn, I shared more about my grief after losing Barbara, how the house had become both a comfort and a prison of memories, how his presence had initially been a welcome distraction from my loneliness. We talked about Barbara often, remembering her wisdom and strength in a way we hadn't while living under the same roof. The holidays came again, but this time Thomas joined me at my condo for Christmas dinner. He brought a small tree ornament, a miniature house, that made me laugh through tears. To remind us both that homes are important, but relationships matter more, he explained. By the 1-year anniversary of selling the family house, both Thomas and I had found our footing in our new lives. His house had transformed from a fixer-upper to a comfortable home that reflected his true personality, not the image he had been trying to project. My condo had become my sanctuary, filled with good books, comfortable furniture, and the freedom to live exactly as I pleased. I made peace with my decision to sell the family home. While I sometimes missed the familiar creaks of the stairs and the height markers on the kitchen doorframe that had tracked Thomas's childhood growth, I recognized that the house had served its purpose in our lives. Like a beloved but outgrown sweater, it had kept us warm and protected until it was time to pass it on. The most profound lesson I learned through this painful chapter was about the courage to stand up for myself, even to those I love most. For too long I had confused accommodation with love, believing that putting my son's desires above my own needs was the mark of good parenting. In reality, the greatest gift I could give both Thomas and myself was honoring my own dignity. By refusing to be pushed aside, by taking dramatic action rather than passive acceptance, I had not only preserved my independence, but ultimately helped Thomas grow into a more thoughtful, responsible man. Sometimes love requires not sacrifice, but boundaries, not yielding but standing firm. As I sit on my balcony watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink, I think about how our most painful losses can lead to unexpected growth. I lost my home of 35 years, but I gained a renewed relationship with my son, built on mutual respect rather than obligation or convenience. If you're facing a similar situation with family or loved ones, remember that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy relationships. Sometimes the people closest to us need to be reminded of our worth, even if the reminder comes in ways they don't initially appreciate. What's your experience with setting boundaries with family? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to preserve your self-respect? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more life lessons from someone who's been there. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and write a new chapter in your story. Thank you for listening to mine.